Welcome to the live stream for Starlink with the SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. I'm Josiah Coy, and I'm the chief engineer at a student rocket group called Astra. Our logo is here on the shirt. And we stream these launches mainly to kind of get an idea of what's going on in the commercial launch market and also to maybe get some inspiration for how we design our rockets. And I also have to say, for me personally, SpaceX has been kind of a particular interesting motivation because basically the things that I saw that were happening at SpaceX are what basically inspired me to be the engineer that I am today. And I'm hoping that we can kind of continue that legacy of inspiring the future generations, and why not start at the source, right? So there's actually something special about the SpaceX launch today, and particularly why I'm streaming it. They launch so many rockets these days that they all kind of blend together a little bit, but it wasn't always this way. The notable achievement that's happening today is having to do with the frequency at which they're launching, and most notably the rate at which they're increasing that frequency, which has really been going crazy in the past year or two. So we really want to highlight that and talk about why that's interesting and why that's important. For the launch today, you can always check the time that the rocket will be going. It'll be here in the bottom. There'll be a timer there. So look down there and you'll be able to see the time at which the rocket should be launching. So we're at T-minus 20 minutes right now. The main stream should be starting up in about 10 minutes, and we'll go join that stream and watch the launch, hopefully launch successfully today. So yeah, that's kind of the picture for the day. But first I want to talk about why I wanted to stream this launch particularly, and it has to do with the record that's being broken today, which is the launch number for the number of launches SpaceX has completed in 1 year. So historically, you can kind of see here the number of launches per year for SpaceX. And you can see that the number has been increasing for the past 10 years. And of course, we're now here in 2022, and we've actually reached already the number of launches that were launched back at the end of 2021. And it's only July. So there's obviously going to be many, many more launches that are coming this year. And it's just showing you basically the intensity in which SpaceX is increasing their launch frequency and how serious they are about truly making space cheaper and more affordable for everyone, and also making it accessible to the future generations. So yeah, if everything goes well today, this will be the 32nd launch, and it'll mark the most launches that SpaceX has ever completed in a single year. And I think it's also the most launches that any single company has done in a year as well. The only places that have more launches per year would be like nations. So SpaceX is in a kind of a realm of their own where basically they're competing with, whole countries. Yeah, quite interesting. So how are they able to do this? Well, they have this wonderful vehicle called the Falcon 9, of course. And here are some of the specs that vehicle comes with. So, it's about 70 meters tall. Main diameter is 3.7 meters. An interesting thing about that diameter, they actually picked it not for like an engineering reason or like a particular reason for that. The reason why they picked 3.7 meters is because that's the maximum diameter you can have and still fit on American highways. So they wanted to make sure that they could move this rocket through America via truck. So basically put it on a trailer, a really long trailer, granted, but still on a trailer. And basically, yeah, 3.7 meters was the maximum that's possible. So that's why the rocket has this diameter. And it's a very unique diameter for a rocket of this class because it's quite skinny, actually, compared to other vehicles. And we'll see some comparisons later on. But they kind of wanted to make their rocket in a way that was giving it the most cost-effective solution. And you can really see that optimization in all the choices that they made on this vehicle. So it's always good to keep an eye out and look for those things. Some other stats about the capabilities that it has to go to low Earth orbit and geostationary transfer orbit. These numbers that I put here are for the reusable form of the vehicle, which is of course pretty much the only form that they fly these days. I don't think they've ever expended a rocket in the last 2 years. So this is pretty much the only configuration that they fly in anymore. And given the mass that they have, capacity to send to these two different destinations, there's no reason why they would ever need to fly in an expendable mode, because I don't think you could even fit that much mass into that fairing if you wanted to. So they're mainly volume restricted rather than mass restricted. So yeah, that's a little bit about what Falcon 9 is able to achieve. And the other part, which we're mentioning, which is about the reusability. So of course the booster is reusable, and the booster that's going to be flying on this mission today is called 1071.4. And the way that the numbers work, basically the 1071 identifies the booster itself. So in this case, it's booster 1071. And the 0.4 is identifying the number of times that it's flown. So in this case, this is the fourth flight, which is why you see the 0.4 there. This particular booster is basically stationed out at Vandenberg Space Force Base, so it's on the west coast, and it's only flown missions that are on the west coast, because of course, if you have so many boosters, you can kind of put them in one area and they just kind of stay in that one area. It's easier for transportation, right? And basically, SpaceX has a fleet now that's one on the west at Vandenberg Space Force Base and one on the east at Florida. So yeah, they're almost like an airline operator kind of, but just for spaceships. So it's kind of interesting. The reason why they're launching from Vandenberg Space Force Base is because they want to go into what's called a polar orbit, which means that the satellites are going to be going north to south instead of east to west. And basically, it makes more sense to fly from Vandenberg Space Force Base in order to get into that kind of orbit. Because if you go from Florida, you actually are kind of flying over some islands in the Caribbean to do that type of a launch. And in order to avoid that, they have to do this weird like dog leg side maneuver. So they kind of have to like miss Cuba, and that takes extra fuel. So it's better to just go from the Space Force Base at Vandenberg. And yeah, so that's basically the idea for this booster. The other flights that is done you can see them there. One thing that's interesting though is that the turnaround time has been decreasing, and it's the turnaround time for this mission is only 34 days, which is like super fast. So you'll see this time decreasing over time as SpaceX basically gets better at refurbishing the boosters. They've made some optimizations in the past couple of months, and a lot of the boosters are being turned around this fast now. Which they need to do because they have so many launches to do. So basically, they're kind of being forced into this in order to achieve what they want. The last part is the landing. So today the landing is going to go out to the drone ship. It won't be able to get all the way back to the landing at like on land. This booster has actually done 2 return to launch site landings and only 1 drone ship landing. So this will be its second drone ship landing. But how will it do that landing? So basically, we have a series that the whole launch will go through once we get to T-0. We're at T-minus 13 minutes. If you just joined, you can always check the clock at the bottom. That tells you when we're going to be launching. So keep that in mind. So at T-minus 0, all 9 Merlin engines will ignite, and the Falcon 9 will basically take off the launch stand and begin flying into the air. And then at about T-minus 2.5 minutes or so, we're going to get to what's called MECO, which is the main engine cutoff. And those 9 Merlin engines will basically turn off because they run out of the fuel for the launch. Now they need the rest of the fuel to get back to go do the landing. And the second stage will separate from the first stage and be ready to ignite its engine, which is the next part. That'll come just a couple seconds later. You'll see that second stage ignition. But also, you'll notice that the booster will start flipping around because it needs to get its engines pointed towards its direction of flight so that it can re-enter the atmosphere without burning up. There's a bunch of shielding on the bottom of that booster that protects it from the atmosphere, so that's going to help it out there. Then basically you're going to get your entry burn. So it's not just enough to have the vehicle come down into the atmosphere and basically bleed off its speed with just the aerodynamics. It needs to have basically a protective layer. And this kind of sounds weird, but actually the thrust that comes out of the engine, like the gases that come out of the engine, are colder than the heat that comes from the friction with the atmosphere. So it's actually like a protective layer that comes when you ignite the engine for the reentry. It basically protects the whole base of the engine from getting too hot. It sounds kind of weird that you would like ignite an engine to like cool yourself down. Kind of weird, but it's the way it works. Then finally, you'll see the landing burn attempted. This will be about 8 minutes after the launch or so. And basically, it'll be targeting the drone ship, and you'll see it coming in onto the drone ship. And recently, it seems like they've upgraded their streams with the ability to capture that drone ship landing. So we should get a clean feed, hopefully. I suspect it's because they've done some like optimizations and they're maybe using Starlink in order to do this. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting a nice clean feed of that drone ship landing, which is always quite spectacular. And then finally, just some seconds later, we'll have the orbital insertion burn ending. So basically the second stage engine will cut off and the payload will be in orbit. And I forgot to add the slide for the deployment of the payload. That payload that's on top are those, there's going to be about 46 Starlink satellites. Basically, as soon as the engine shuts off, there'll be about a minute delay, and then they'll start to spin the second stage, and they'll just basically let it go, and that'll be the end of the mission. And then the Starlink satellites will kind of do their thing and start to automate and making their way up to the orbit that they need to get into. They all have these like little ion drives on them, so basically from there, they all have their own engines, and they kind of find where they need to be. In order to achieve this, they need to have some features on the rocket that will allow it to be recovered. So basically, you can't just recover any rocket. There's like strategies you need to use in order to beat basically the high heating and the fast speeds that you have coming back in to have a controlled landing. So basically, these are kind of the main elements that they have. So namely, the titanium grid fins are basically what allow them to navigate towards the drone ship. So they can kind of use aerodynamic forces even when they're supersonic with these grid fins in order to do that. If you're just using regular fins, they don't really work as well at supersonic speeds and through the transonic regime especially because of the way the shock waves build up on a fin. So these grid fins actually help with that and make it a little bit smoother. They also have cold gas thrusters that are on the vehicle. Those are to orient the vehicle when it's in space because of course there's no air in space, so you can't use aerodynamics to reorientate your vehicle. So instead, they use these cold gas thruster packs. They a long time ago incorporated supercooled liquid oxygen into the booster, and this was basically just to get more oxygen into the booster itself, so they could get more fuel and oxidizer into a smaller area, and this allowed them to, of course, take more fuel so that they could actually land the booster. And then finally, like there's things on there, like of course you need the landing legs so that it can land properly. I already talked about the heat-resistant engine housing. Basically, they have a protective layer there so they can survive the temperatures of the reentry. And then, of course, you need to have an engine that restarts because they actually have to restart the engine twice in order to achieve the landing that they want. So, yeah, those are basically the elements you need to at least perform a recovery mission like the way SpaceX does. So, we're just waiting on the SpaceX main feed right now, so we'll be checking in as soon as that kicks up, but for now it's still not going yet. Maybe we talk a little bit about the Starlink mission, the like Starlink satellites themselves in the meantime, because it's actually quite an interesting constellation. Basically, they're using this in order to provide communications, mainly like basically Wi-Fi, for the entire world, which is truly an ambitious target, I have to say. But they have managed to find a way to basically pull this off. One place that's interesting to look at this is with the Starlink Live website, and I'll put a link to this in the description at some point. But basically here you can see a live view of the location of every Starlink satellite that has been launched to date. And this is really cool because basically you have like every single one of these little gray dots is a Starlink satellite. And yeah, there you can see there's really been a lot. There's over 2,000 that have been launched. So they really do have global coverage at this point. But you also see these like little trains of satellites like scattered around. These are batches of satellites that have been newly launched. So just launched in the last month or two. So you can already see there's like multiple trains of these. because they've launched like I think 4 or 5 batches of these satellites in the last 2 months. So they've really upped their frequency lately. The reason why this happens is because they need to get up to their target altitude, and it takes them a little while to get there. The ion thrusters that are on these things are not so powerful, so it actually takes them a month or two to fully raise their orbits to the altitude that they need to get to. And while they're doing that, they kind of go along these trains. If you're an astute nighttime observer, you might be able to spot these guys because they're kind of obvious, because they'll make like a little train across the sky. You'll see like, tiny little dots moving. But they are kind of faint, so you do have to be a little bit knowledgeable about where they are in order to really see them. But yeah, always interesting to look at it. You can also check out like where your area is and see like how well you're covered. But I think at this point, most of the world is like 100% covered, unless you live like way up in the north in Russia or Canada, or of course if you're in Antarctica, but that's not very many people. But the launch that's going today is going to be covering those areas, because they're going to start launching these satellites right over the North Pole and the South Pole. That's basically what this batch is doing. So this will be rectified probably within the next year or so. They'll also have coverage even at the poles. So, all right. Maybe you're interested in what a Starlink satellite looks like. They basically kind of look like these suitcase-looking things with like big solar panels attached to them. And they have like all their thruster, orientation, power systems all incorporated into that little tiny. It basically looks like a suitcase, and it's bigger than a suitcase, of course. Maybe it's like more like a table in width and volume, like just like a table top, kind of, I guess. But yeah, they're relatively small in comparison to what the giant satellites of the past for communication might have looked like. So again, SpaceX trying to make everything as efficient as possible. But one thing I've noticed is that they're launching less and less of these on the Starlink missions. Like now they're only launching 46. They started launching like 60 of these on a rocket, but now they're down to 46. And there's 2 reasons for this, kind of. The first one is that, well, when they were launching 60, they were not going as high in altitude at the start, and they actually lost a couple of batches of satellites due to weather from the sun, because when the sun gets more active, it kind of causes the outer layers of the atmosphere to kind of balloon out, and then the satellites have more drag. So if the sun's more active than you expect, you can get in a situation where there's more drag than those ion thrusters can provide, and then then all your rocket launches for nothing, and then the satellites just deorbit and crash into the Earth. So that happened, and they decided, okay, we go to a slightly higher orbit to start so that we avoid that. The other part is that they're kind of starting to put like secondary payloads onto these missions, and obviously that's a great cost-saving maneuver to do. So sometimes they throw some extra payloads on there. I don't think there's any listed payloads on this one that are extra, but considering the number of satellites, I feel like there could be some mysterious secondary payloads potentially. But I don't know. We'll have to look closely at the what's going on in the nose cone to know if that's actually the case. But yeah, the NROL also, and other spy agencies sometimes sneak stuff on, and SpaceX just doesn't disclose, and then it's like hiding in plain sight kind of a thing. All right. Okay, it looks like the main feed just started back up, so let's switch to over there and see what's going on.
It's difficult to see. Now, for those of you that are following along, you'll know that we stood down from our launch attempt yesterday. At T-minus 1 minute, the Falcon 9 flight computer took control of the countdown for its final pre-launch checks, as it always does. At T-minus 46 seconds, the vehicle identified an off-nominal reading from one of our Merlin M1D engines. The flight computer saw an out-of-limits reading on a backup valve position within the first stage propulsion system, and this reading caused an automatic hold on the countdown. Since then, the teams investigated, resolved the issue, and we are now go for launch. As you can see, like I mentioned before...
Stage 1, LOX load is complete.
So it looks like we're close to launch here.
We just heard the call out there that Stage 1 LOX load is complete. That is Falcon 9's first stage, is now fully loaded with all of its RP1, or liquid kerosene, and LOX, or liquid oxygen. The weather, although it is foggy at the pad, we're actually located just over that ridge that you see there. The weather only has a 20% chance of violation of our launch criteria, so that's good news there. We are tracking no major issues. The range is green and ready to support liftoff in just under 2.5 minutes from now. And in preparation for liftoff, we are standing by for TE retraction.
Okay, so it looks like they're good for launch today. They did try.
We've been underway with propellant load since T-minus 35 minutes, and the second stage, which sits on top of the rocket above the first stage, has already completed its RP1 load and will finish its LOX load in just a few seconds from now.
They did try to launch yesterday, but they had automatic stop. That's what she was talking about. So hopefully that won't happen today, but we will see. And yeah, going to be a bit of a foggy launch, but it should be clearer, hopefully, at the drone ship. So maybe we get a nice view there. Maybe we don't get such good footage out of the tracking camera, though, because of the
LOX load is complete.
At this point in time, Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of fuel and liquid oxygen. Today marks the 4th flight for this first stage and SpaceX's 170th mission overall.
And also, its 32nd mission this year, which breaks a record for the most launches in a year. I feel like they should be more proud about that. So it's now going to be in the automatic count. So the computer on board the Falcon 9 has full control now. And if it sees any problem, it will just stop. So
LD is go for launch.
But it looks like we're all good here.
Falcon 9's in startup.
So keep a lookout.
Seconds.
Keep a lookout for those key moments, like Miko and.
Today's mission is for Starlink, sending an additional 46 satellites to low Earth orbit, or LEO.
And the booster flipping and things like that.
15 seconds.
So-
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right,
Ignition.
here we go.
And liftoff of Starlink 3-2. Go Falcon 9.
Should see this coming out of the clouds pretty soon here.
Vehicles pushing down
Ah,
range.
there we go.
M1D chamber pressures are nominal.
So I don't work at Astra, the company. I'm a chief engineer at Astra, the student group, which is a group in Bremen. And we build rockets, basically, which will hopefully go to space. So everything's looking pretty good so far. They're going to be going through.
Nominal.
They're going to be going through max Q here pretty quick, which is basically the maximum aerodynamic stress on the vehicle. That'll be once they hit about 1,300 kilometers per hour.
Vehicle supersonic.
Apologies for
As you
the
just
delay.
heard, Falcon 9 is now traveling faster than the speed of sound.
Max Q.
Falcon 9 has now passed through max Q, the maximum dynamic pressure that it will feel during flight.
All right, so you're going to notice that the gases are going to start, like the thrust is going to start getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger on the back end of the booster. And that's because it's going into less and less atmosphere. So basically the gases are able to expand a lot more and give the rocket a little bit of an extra boost of thrust.
With that call out there, we heard that the second stage is preparing to ignite its Merlin vacuum engine. We're less than 1 minute away from main engine cutoff, stage separation, and second engine start.
Quest.
Beautiful view of the California coast there in the background behind the first stage.
I also find that California launches are a little bit better for the scenery on the ground. That's just a personal opinion. I think the area looks nicer from above. That's Miko.
Stage separation confirmed. Impact started. Fairing separation confirmed.
So the fairings are also coming off here because they don't need them anymore.
As you saw right there, those fairings deployed. Today marks the third flight for one of those fairing halves and the fifth flight for the other. As usual, we will be attempting to recover these once again after they fall back to Earth.
So they recover those fairings, hopefully, with basically a ship that goes out and fishes them out of the ocean. They're designed to basically land and float on the water.
On the left-hand side of your screen, we can see the first stage as those grid fins have deployed, and the second stage on the right-hand side of your screen as that MVAC engine nozzle begins to glow orange.
And you'll notice that the booster is slowly doing a little flip as it goes here. So that's why you're kind of getting different scenery as you go. And basically it's orienting itself so that it'll be going feet first. And that will allow it to protect itself thermally. And it'll also give those grid fins the chance to steer the vehicle basically to the drone ship. And you'll get to see those grid fins moving and doing their job to navigate the vehicle.
Everything continues to look good for both the first and second stages. We can see that the first stage on the left-hand side of your screen has peaked and is now making its descent back to Earth.
It's nice that they have both of the altitude and velocity readouts. I remember they didn't always used to do that. They always pick one, but I like they show both.
Vehicles on a nominal trajectory.
As a reminder, today's payload is for SpaceX's satellite internet constellation, Starlink.
Which is over 50% complete, the Starlink constellation. So this, they're about 2/3 of the way through the full initial shell of satellites that they wanted to create. There's like future plans for bigger stuff, but they're actually getting, quite close to finishing.
The next major event that we have coming up in about a minute is Stage 1 entry burn, where we reignite 3 Merlin engines at the base of the first stage, the center engine and 2 radial engines. We relight those as in preparation for the first stage's re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere.
The reason why they light 3 of them, there are 2 reasons, I guess. Number one, if one doesn't ignite, then you still have some to do the work for you. So I think they can handle an engine out in this situation.
Second stage is following a nominal trajectory.
The other reason is that you actually get more bang for your buck if you ignite more engines, because you use less of your energy fighting gravity. So you can achieve the same burn in a shorter period of time, which is technically more efficient. And those puffs of gas that are coming off the booster are coming from those cold gas thrusters. And that's what's helping to navigate the vehicle, but we're still
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
kind of too high for the aerodynamics to play.
As you can see, Stage 1 has reignited 3 of its engines to help slow it down for atmospheric re-entry.
And you really see how fast that speed bleeds off when they light up those engines, because the thrust-to-weight ratio of the vehicle when it's just the booster is like really high.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
It looks kind of peaceful from the camera, but it's actually like a really violent maneuver. Oh, it looks like we're going to lose a signal. No! hopefully we get it back close to the landing.
Second stage is following a nominal trajectory.
And the velocity that second stage is trying to get up to is roughly 28,000 kilometers an hour. So it's about 2/3 of the way there right now. And it does most of its acceleration in this
Stage
next
1
minute or
transonic.
so.
As we just heard there, first stage is now traveling near the speed of sound.
Okay, here we go. Here's the camera back. All right.
Expected loss of signal, Vandenberg.
Stage 2 FTS was saved.
We're now coming up to the landing burn for that first stage that you see there.
Stage 1 landing burn.
The first stage has lit one engine, the center engine, to prepare for landing on our drone ship. Of course, I still love you.
So you see how much those fins have to
Terminal
work
guidance.
to orient the vehicle. It's really quite a lot.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Wow. That's basically right on the target. Bullseye.
Stage 1
Landed
landing
right on the
burn.
X.
As you can see there on your screen, Falcon 9 has landed, marking SpaceX's 56th first stage landing on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, and our 125th Falcon 9 landing overall.
Tico 1.
So it looks like they are in this.
Nominal orbital insertion.
Perfect. So 32nd successful launch of the year for SpaceX, marking a new record for frequency of launch. And I'm sure they're just going to go and break this record next year. But I would expect they're probably going to get to like 50 launches this year.
And as
they
you
have
heard, we had a good second engine cutoff. Second stage is now carrying those 46 Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit. Thanks for joining us for our 53rd Starlink mission. If you were excited to follow us through launch today and have interest in joining our team in Vandenberg, be sure to check out spacex.com/careers. Also be sure to check SpaceX social media for confirmation of Starlink deploy, and we'll see you soon.
So basically, at this point, they're going to be doing basically a spin maneuver with that second stage booster, which will create rotational inertia, and they'll basically just release those Starlink payloads into their orbits. I guess they don't show those on the live stream anymore. Yeah, I feel like SpaceX has kind of trimmed down the length of their live streams quite a lot since the old days, shall I say. So I just wanted to also show you a bit of a graph that shows you kind of the progress of the building up of the Starlink constellation. So here you can see basically the blue line is the number of Starlink payloads that have been deployed over the months, basically since 2019. And they covered they made it to the yellow line way back last year, like at the start of last year, which was the amount they needed for global coverage. And they kind of like took a break after that a little bit. And then they've really ramped up the Starlink launch operations again and are back on track to probably finish the constellation sometime by the end of this year. So yeah, we wished SpaceX all the best luck with delivering and getting their Starlink constellation fully operational. And yeah, if you want to have internet in a remote area, it's definitely going to be a good option for doing that, because they're going to be replacing these satellites on a constant rate, and the constellation is going to keep growing. So it's really exciting for the development of faster internet and stuff. The other thing that I just wanted to talk about a little bit was kind of looking at what makes the Falcon 9 really special, especially in comparison with other vehicles, because basically the Falcon 9 is outcompeting the entire market right now. And you can tell that they're doing this because of the frequency of the launches, which, they're the only launcher that's really, rapidly increasing launch frequency like this in the entire world. So there's a reason for it. Basically, this is what spells out the entire thing. So this is basically Falcon 9's, I would say, one of its biggest competitors in the launch market that it competes in, which is basically the medium to heavy lift launch market. And so this is the Ariane 5 and the Falcon 9. You put them toe to toe. They're basically, similar vehicles. They have similar low Earth orbit payload deliveries, similar GTO payload deliveries. But then you get down to the cost line, and the Falcon 9 is less than half the cost of an Ariane 5. And then basically, like, if you're a satellite operator and you want to move your payload into orbit, you'd be insane to try and use an Ariane 5 in most cases. The only cases where Falcon 9 kind of loses out to the Ariane 5 is when you want to move payloads even beyond geostationary transfer orbit. So like way out, going to like Mars or something, because Falcon 9 is not so good at that because its propellant combination is not the most efficient one, just using kerosene and liquid oxygen. Whereas Ariane 5 uses hydrogen and oxygen, which allows them to do those higher energy type orbits and trajectories. So beyond that, like Ariane 5 doesn't really have much of a market anymore. So, and there's a lot of other launchers around the world that kind of come back from that older era of like, the 90s and the 2000s when they were developed that really just don't compete with Falcon 9. And that's why Falcon 9 is, taking over the entire market in this category. So there's lots of new vehicles that are coming online in the next couple of years, on paper at least. And they're hopefully will compete with, Falcon 9. But by then, SpaceX will be already over and done with that. I'm sure they'll be on to bigger and better things and getting their Starship operational. So it seems like, the whole industry is kind of just always behind, They can never really catch up to SpaceX. So it's always really cool to see, just how competitive and how determined they are to make things better and, develop better rocket technologies. On that note, we, as a student group, Astra, we also are dedicated to try to expand rocket technologies and capabilities, and we want to help put our mark into the rocket industry, at least in the amateur rocket industry. And we want to build a rocket called Transcendence, basically, and we want to get that all the way to space. So we don't build orbital rockets, but we want to build a rocket that just goes up into space and will come back down. There's only been one student group in the entire world that's ever done this, and so we're kind of looking to be the first European group that's going to be able to do this. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about here, this is kind of the specifications that our vehicle will have. So it's just going to be like a 200, 300 kilogram vehicle. It's actually quite tall, 6.5 meters tall. And lots of thrust. 24 kilonewtons is no joke. Nothing like the Merlin engines, but certainly a lot of thrust. And if you check out our channel, you can see some of our updates and stuff that are going on with how we're building this and testing it. You can also, just to give you a little bit of a taste, we just got some bulkheads in from our manufacturer a couple of weeks ago, and we're looking forward to incorporating these into our tanks and into our recovery system. So that'll definitely be interesting. We also just finished making a carbon fiber tube, and this is like, it's quite large. You can see it here. It's sitting on my cooking scale, and you can really get a sense of the size a little bit there. That's sitting on my dining room table. And here is a little bit of a video of us wrapping this tube. This is only 1/5 the size of the tank that we're actually going to build for the final vehicle. So just to give you a size of the scale of what we're trying to do here, it's actually a lot larger than you expect. So yeah, we're looking forward to building this and hopefully sending it to space and, contributing to the same spirit that SpaceX has, which is trying to bring space to more people around the world and make it a cheaper and more accessible endeavor. Look to space. I think that's where things are going to get cool. So I want to thank you all for watching and sticking around to watch this launch with us. and hopefully you learned something and maybe inspired a little bit to check out some more stuff about space. And if you're interested in doing some amateur rocketry, I invite you to look around your community for amateur rocketry groups that are in your area. Also, if you're in university, there's usually rocket groups at almost every university around. So, and if there isn't, you should start one. That's exactly what we did. All right. Yeah, thanks for joining, and see you next time. Remember to expand your horizons.